everyone, and welcome to Petra Coach's Thought Leadership webinar series. Petra Coach is a mind shift business that empowers leaders and their teams to scale through the facilitation and implementation of the Rockefeller habits. With a wide network of thought leaders and industry experts, these webinars serve as an opportunity for you to connect personally with them and ask your most pressing business questions. Today, we have Tom and Andy from STS Capital Partners with us. The STS team is comprised of expert guides for entrepreneurial business owners on the journey to a successful exit, ensuring the best possible outcome. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. In this webinar, the STS team will dive into critical considerations for an owner thinking about selling their business, including pre-sale components, analyzing and comparing buyer profiles, and how to maximize your value. As a reminder, this is an interactive session, so we want to hear from you. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the chat and the Q&A. We encourage you to use those throughout the webinar whenever you have a question or a comment for the team. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off and get us started.
Hey, fantastic. We appreciate you guys having us here today. My name's Tom Turner. I am a managing director with STS Capital. And we also have Andy. I'll let Andy introduce himself. Andy's president of North American Strategies for STS Capital and also a managing director.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here.
So I'll jump in, and I'm not, it appears that I'm not able to see you guys, but was going to start by asking the question, how many of you are already working with a Petra coach?
I can go ahead and put that in the chat and we can see kind of.
Yeah, that'd be great. Well, I'm, for those of you that are already working with a Petra coach, would tell you that you are already on a good path. And I'm speaking from experience with that. Let me see if I can get my screen shared here. There we go. Can everybody see my screen?
We can't see it.
Let's see, share screen. Now can you see my screen?
Yes.
There we go.
You got it, Tom.
Fantastic. So if you're already working with Petra, I'll tell you, first of all, congratulations for making that investment. We, as background, I was a serial entrepreneur, have exited multiple companies, and we were, I believe, either the first or second customer of Petra. We hired Petra. I had the good fortune of meeting Andy Bailey, who was the founder of Petra. And we had been in business for, I believe, 7 to 8 years. Business was growing. We were having great success. But frankly, I was miserable in my job. I felt like I was running an adult daycare. We were making great money. We had zero debt. But it was organized chaos at best. And Andy from Petra Coach was building a relationship with me and talking to me about Petra and their services and Rockefeller habits and how we could use that in our business. And I didn't think it was for me, but finally Andy was able to convince me that it was, mostly by sharing with me that our revenues, yes, had been growing 30 to 40% per year, but that our people and our process had not, and that they could help us to do that. And they did. And not only were they able to help us to do that, but they also ultimately introduced me to STS Capital. And that's what I want to talk to you about a little bit today, the experience that I've gained through the process of selling my company, and also a little bit about STS Capital. Let's see if I can get this to go to the next slide here. Great. So STS, just as a background, is a sell-side advisor. We are 100% focused on the outcome of the owner of the business. What that means is that we also do not do buy-side. And I share that with you to tell you that why that's important. When we were going through a process of evaluating selling our own company, we were interviewing lots of different bankers. We looked at the large bankers like Houlihan Lokey down to small bankers, boutique bankers, and bankers that had very specific industry experience. I had a business in the legal services industry and had worked in that industry for more than 25 years. We had narrowed down our assessment of bankers to two different groups. One was STS Capital. The other group was a group that I was introduced to by colleagues of mine that were in our industry, that had good exits, not great exits, but had been pleased with the banker that they worked with out of Atlanta, Georgia. And as we were evaluating the two bankers, we were leaning towards going with a group out of Atlanta, primarily because of the amount of industry experience that they had. STS Capital is industry agnostic, and we were concerned that because they did not have industry experience, that they would not be able to achieve the outcome that we were working for. And so we shared that with them. We told them that we were leaning towards going with the other group. And their response was, well, that actually might be one of the reasons that you want to consider working with us. The other question they asked is, does the group out of Atlanta do buy side as well as sell side? And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, they do. And they said, well, that would be another reason that you might consider going with STS. And I said, well, look, I'm new to all this, so you have to help me to understand. I would think that would be a quiver, an arrow in their quiver, so to speak. And they said, well, if you're doing buy side and sell side, it's not uncommon for the waters to get muddied. Who is the actual client? You as a business owner only sell your business once, whereas private equity groups that they may be working with on the buy side are buying companies regularly. And they get confused that what's more important to them, you as a customer who sells the business once, or the private equity who's buying lots of businesses. We unfortunately actually later learned that they were having conversations with other groups, we ultimately chose to work with STS Capital. The other was in terms of being focused on specific industries. The group out of Atlanta that we were talking to was sharing with us that they thought we would trade in the 10 to 12 times multiple of EBITDA. That was where the industry traded, is what we saw as the trades and the valuations. There were some outliers, but with companies that were a good bit larger than ours. STS Capital, ironically, was telling us that they thought that we would trade in the 16 to 20 times earnings. But frankly, we thought they could have told us that it might be 30 to 40 times. They were just trying to get our business. We ultimately had an extraordinary exit with STS Capital, achieving a multiplier of 20.5 times earnings. And so there are really three legs to the stool, or three pillars of STS. One is success to significance. STS stands for creating success to significance by selling to strategics. And we do that by hiring expert guides. Expert guides being owner operators who have run businesses, who have sold businesses, like myself, like Andy, also who have significant M&A experience. And I tell you that in that as you begin to consider selling your business in the future, it's important in evaluating and understanding who it is that's going to be a part of your team and representing you in selling your business. And how that played out for us was, as we were evaluating different bankers, one of the things that we did see was that while all of the other bankers that we were evaluating were very sophisticated, highly educated, none of them had actually owned and operated businesses. They weren't expert guides. They didn't understand what it meant to grow a business, to bootstrap a business, to potentially raise capital in a business. And I think equally important was the success to significance component. And for me, I think that looks two different ways. One is the significance that you may achieve after you sell your business. but it's also the significance of who you become after you sell your business. I interestingly attended a conference yesterday here in Nashville that was called 90 is the new 60. And one of the things they talked about as a step that if you want to live a long and healthy life is that you never retire. You don't want to work so hard that you can retire and have nothing to do. And while selling my business was great and I would not change what we did, I've been blessed in having a great exit, and I have built a community of people around me who have also had great exits. And it's not an uncommon theme to hear from people who have exited their business with a plan on retiring, and then they end up really almost in a state of depression. And I think by working with owners and entrepreneurs through someone like STS who have gone through this journey can help you kind of lean into the future and think through what does significance look like for you? Is it getting involved with charities or nonprofits? Is it starting another business? Is it becoming a teacher? The other thing that having expert guides making a difference in terms of thinking through your business is it's again something that most people will only do once in their life. And having a plan with a great team that includes tax attorneys, accountants, estate planning attorneys, trying to understand what the options are that are available to you, because what we learned, thankfully, we had, again, STS, who our managing director had been through this journey and was able to give us ideas years in advance to start preparing for estate planning and tax planning and strategies that, frankly, if we had waited until the very end to start trying to plan for those things, many of the options would not have been available to us once we sold our company, and B, we just would not have had the time to do it. Other things in terms of being expert guides, trying to think through and understand what is it that's driving your decision for an exit. Thinking through, we provide an exercise called an owner outcome exercise that I believe is a key differentiator and one of the things that STS does, trying to lean into the future to understand what's driving the decision for your exit. Is it something to do with your industry as a whole? Is it something to do with your partner? What does your ideal exit look like? Who do you want the buyer to be? What are your preferred and required outcomes? Do you want to stay on with the business? Do you want to transition to a new owner where you continue to work? In our particular case, and I think this is another example of where working with a company like PetraCoach can be extremely valuable. In my business, I was somewhat the face of our organization. I had started the company just myself and a business partner. I was the one who got out and did the sales and built the relationships. And over time, as it grew, I maintained a lot of those key relationships that we had with our largest customers. I also understood and knew that when I sold the company in the future, that I wanted to be able to exit the company day one, and I did not want to stick around and have to be a part of the leadership with the new owners and operators. But in order to do that, I couldn't be the face of the company. So I was the president of the company working with Petra. We were able to put together a plan where over a couple of years, I replaced myself as president. We built a very strong leadership team. And then ultimately, when we were able to sell the company, it allowed me the freedom of exiting day one, walking away from the business. We also had, thankfully, for the help for STS Capital, we were able to put some guardrails around that because we made the option to roll a significant amount of equity into the new company. And we wanted to make sure that some of our leadership was going to remain there as long as our investment was there to help drive the outcome beyond that. But again, just having a great team, having expert advisors in place that have been down this road. Do you have the right team in place internally and externally? Are your financials in order? We, as example, we're running our business on a cash basis. STS helped us to understand that, in us to really understand how our business was doing, that we needed to get converted to an accrual basis, which we did, and we did that well in advance of our transaction. That helped us significantly as the buyer came in to do buy-side due diligence. The other is, have you recently been approached by buyers? And I will tell you again, in our own business, and I'm going to jump ahead to the next slide here. In our own business, we had been on the Inc. 500, 5,000 list for many years. And we were getting a lot of inquiries. In particular, we were getting inquiries from private equity groups. Andy's going to talk a little bit more about this. We've identified there are two different types of buyers. There's a financial buyer and a strategic buyer. I would actually place a third category, what I call a quasi-strategic buyer. As in our case, we had a corporation, a strategic buyer that was buying us, but they were majority owned by a private equity. And I'll describe the financial buyer. They're typically like a private equity, and that's not to suggest that all private equity is bad. There are a lot of great private equity companies out there. Not all, but they are very, very sophisticated. They're good at what they do, and they do it regularly. And typically their model is to buy something at a discounted value, to try and increase that value, and then to sell it again for an additional increased value. And how that played out for us, when I first met with Rob Follows. Rob is the founder of STS Capital. And he was asking me some of these questions about, are you being approached by buyers or interested parties? And I said, yes, I'm talking to a lot of private equity. And I said, but the thing that I don't understand about the private equity, they all tell me the same thing. They all tell me how interested they are and how great we are and how they want to be a partner and help us. And I think they're sincere, but they tell me the ways that they are going to do that would be that, one, they help by taking some chips off the table. That more than likely the vast majority of our net worth is tied up in our business, and they can help by diversifying, give us some cash and taking chips off the table, which was true. They could also, though, for me, I considered at what cost, and I weighed that against the fact that my business, frankly, was at the time probably my best investment. The other was that they would give us capital to go and do acquisitions. And I'm certain that they could give us the capital to go and do acquisitions. But again, I just didn't have an understanding of what the cost for that capital might be. And then lastly, that they had, a large portfolio of companies, and that they had an extensive board, that, many of their board members were in public companies, and they could help open doors to get us into they could help get us into companies that we might not otherwise get into. And typically my response to the private equity guys was, hey, this all sounds great. I actually started my career working in financial services and wealth management. And I understand at least enough to know that, you're making money by trying to buy something at best, at a decreased value or a reduced value, and then try to increase the value and then exit from that. And that doesn't seem to align with our interests. And always the response was, no, we're looking to pay fair market value, and we're going to help and be a partner. And my response was, we've built a great company. We're 20 years in business. We're different. We're better. We don't want fair market value. We want premium value. And that's when Rob Follows at STS told me, he said, Tom, what you just described is exactly correct. And that's why we try to match you directly with selling to strategics and getting lots of interested parties. And that's the value of having, ultimately, if any of you should choose to decide to sell your business, we would love to work with you. But even if you chose not to work with us, I strongly encourage and recommend that you get an advisor of some type that would create a process that gets those companies interested in you, to fall in love with you, to compete and drive value. And again, what happened for us was, as we went through our process, we had multiple interested parties. We had 7 ultimately buyers that gave offers to us, including one from a company that we had worked with for 10 years. And we knew that if we were to join with this company, it would create the greatest enterprise value between our businesses. They unfortunately came in with the lowest offer, and we were thankfully in a position, because of STS, to tell them to pound sand. And we ultimately went with one of the other 6 buyers that also had expressed interest. That group had shared with us that it would take 30 to 45 days of due diligence to get the transaction done. We were just over 6 months into due diligence with that, and we were stuck. We were days away from closing, but we had 3 major sticking points that we weren't able to work through. One was around working capital, which is often an issue. The other was around, they had this funky definition of indebtedness, and it was causing us to have debt that we did not legitimately have. And the last was, we had agreed to an earnout in our business, and they wanted to base the earnout based on EBITDA, which we couldn't get comfortable with. We wanted it to be based on gross profit. And so as we're trying to work through that, this other buyer who we had told to go pound sand came back to us. They reached back out to STS. They had been in the market for just over 6 months, the same period, and they had found that there was not a better fit. Our Rembrandt in the attic that we ended up identifying was that our business, we sold services not based on price, but based on value. And we had a reputation for being one of the more expensive companies in the industry. And the company that they already had an investment in, the portfolio company that they had the same culture. And they had learned that buying a company that sold price and having another company that sold value, that the culture between those 2 clients would not work well. So they came back, they negotiated with STS, they threw us another offer, and that offer ended up being significantly more in value. They also were able to work through the working capital indebtedness and the earnouts based on EBITDA, which we were able to successfully get done. We closed and we exited for 20.5. That's just one example of a quasi-strategic and a financial. Andy, I'm going to let you go into a little more detail around that, and we'll transition. I'll go ahead and jump to the next slide.
Hey, Tom,
Great.
we had a
Tom,
question.
before we do that, John had a question here in the Q&A.
Sorry, I've not.
It goes back to I think one of your prior slides about the external team, your external success team.
Okay, sorry. Let me see.
So his question is, could you elaborate, please, what an ideal external success team looks like and how they interact best with the internal team to maximize success?
Sure. And Andy, I'm sure you can speak to this as well. Yeah. For us, I think there's a couple of different stages. I would tell you in the very early stages, as you're thinking about your business and your exit and what your plans are after the exit, certainly a financial advisor, someone that you're communicating with, that you're beginning, and of course your banker, your sell side advisor, of what the number may be and what the number needs to be, depending on what your outcomes, desired or required outcomes are, and getting an understanding of the lifestyle that you may need and what that number represents, and working with a wealth manager who can run different scenarios and give you some ideas of your investments and diversifications of those investments, et cetera. I think that's one for sure. The other, I believe, is having a good tax attorney. and a great accountant that you're working with, because again, depending on what state, and a great tax attorney and a great estate planning attorney. We were fortunate again in that STS got us thinking about these things a few years in advance, and we were able to do some things that are available, at least in the state of Tennessee, that allowed us to take advantage for estate planning, not as much from immediate tax standpoint, but for down the road, and in an inheritance tax, being able to leverage some opportunities that are available. And if you wait to do those things until after you've sold your business, depending again the state and the laws that you have from an estate planning there, and frankly, you're also out of state able to leverage some of the opportunities through the state of Tennessee. I've learned as we've helped some other clients, but some of those options aren't available if you wait until after you've sold your business. And I think equally as important is it's a pre-plan for the plan of selling your business, because working on selling your business will take a lot of your time and energy. And that's just for selling the business. But there are things that you need to be working on in advance of that. And if you don't get those things done, when you get ready for the actual sale of your business, it will be too much of a distraction for you at that time to try and start working through estate planning and those types of things. So a good accountant, a good attorney's plural, tax, M&A attorney, estate planning attorney. Andy, anything else that wealth advisor?
Yeah, I think the wealth advisor and the tax attorney is probably the biggest thing. I've seen deals where by proper legal structure, and I'd say corporate structure as well with that, proper legal structure and setting up the estate and trust and tax planning properly, it's meant the difference of maybe up to 30 or 40% of the transaction value is kept versus going to tax, right? You can really make a big difference depending on how you structure it and how you're set up. And you need to do that in advance of the sale. So that would be one of the biggest things, I would say. Tom, if we can just jump forward here, I guess, and please, if there's other questions, jump in. We want this to be as interactive as possible. I think like probably slide 5, Tom.
Yes, there we are.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Just following on a little bit, Tom was talking about strategic versus financial buyers, and really just want to highlight, a pure financial buyer, they look at things from a financial perspective, and this would typically be private equity. They're going to look at cash flow and discounted cash flow, and for different types of industries, different types of businesses, different types of margin profiles and revenue profiles, these typically boil down to industry multiples. And in some industries, it might be 5 to 7 times EBITDA. Other industries may be 8 to 10 or 10 to 12 or whatever, but they kind of tend to go by these typical industry multiples. And their goal many times is to buy on the low end of that multiple scale and then ultimately sell on the higher end. And as a business gets bigger, those multiples go up, right? That's the other kind of rule, that larger a business is, the more the multiples go. So that'd be a typical financial buyer. But then when you look at a strategic buyer, and there's the ones that are the most common, the obvious, most obvious ones that are in a particular industry. When you add, they're trying to pick up competitive market share or just trying to roll up within the industry, 1 + 1 can equal 3 or 4. But then when you look at maybe some adjacencies, buyers that aren't in the industry but would love to get into the industry, many times that strategic value is even more. And the key about really driving strategic value is when the strategic buyer can transform your business or the business they want to acquire, and your business also transform their business. Now 1 + 1 can equal 4 or 5. So, and now those typical industry multiples, the strategic value could be 30%, 50%, 100 or 200% of that. And that's really what is driving, a strategic process, identifying those strategic buyers. And then also those strategic buyers many times will meet what your personal outcomes were. And if, as an example, somebody's personal outcome was like, I don't want my business to go away. I want it to thrive and continue. And I want to make sure my business falls into a good home. Many times you find that outlier or that adjacent strategic buyer, that's exactly what they need. They need that business to thrive, and they'll help it thrive, and they're not going to consolidate it or wipe it out. And they need everybody on the team to keep doing what they're doing and doing even more. So as an example, and they're willing to pay a premium to do that. So that's just highlighting once again the difference between strategic and financial buyers. And as Tom mentioned, in his case, there could be a strategic buyer that is backed by private equity, and they're willing to pay that premium. So it's really people that are buying strategically is many times the best buyer for a business. We've highlighted this a little bit, those strategic investors, and Tom mentioned this term Rembrandt in the attic. And Rembrandt in the attic is really what's your secret sauce? What do you have that would really be compelling or of great value to another partner, another company that you'd combine with? And the analogy there is if you go to look at a home and you do your inspection and you go up in the attic and the home is for sale as is, it comes with whatever's in the home. You go up, you're doing your inspection, and you find truly a Rembrandt in the attic. And you go down to the real estate agent and say, everything comes with the house as is. And they said, yes. How much more would you be willing to pay for the house? Of course, you'd pay a premium because you know that home is worth so much more because of this Rembrandt in the attic. And that's what, from our lens and from the lens of a strategic buyer, what is it that you have that they would desperately need or want that would help transform their business? And also, what do they have that helps transform your business? And there's several of things here that could be identified as strategic value drivers to many types of strategic buyers. And to summarize really what we've been talking about here, that the majority of economies around the world are made up of small and medium-sized businesses, all different sizes and types. And that's on the left side of the slide. And on the right side of the slide, there's many different types of strategic buyers in the industry, in different industries, in different segments, in different adjacencies, and also internationally. And the key is to see how they're viewing your business, and then also how do you view their business. And really, by doing this, going direct to the strategic buyers versus the middle of the chart here, which would be financial buyers, who really typically they want to, as Tom mentioned earlier, they want to buy low and they want to sell high, either to strategics or maybe to other larger private equity funds. But they want to try to capture that value. And our whole concept here is that, that value can be had today. So instead of taking a 5 to 7 times multiple and then getting a second bite of the apple a little bit later on, maybe at an 8 or 9 times multiple, why not sell today at a 12 or 15 or 20 times multiple, depending on whatever that strategic value is? And that's really the key message. And hopefully visually this chart helps to demonstrate that.
Andy, I think it's also worth mentioning, just because I have this particular situation with a client right now, in that on the international side, and STS, by the way, is an international M&A advisor, over 26 cities worldwide. And where that's relevant is that, again, the idea in running a process is to try and get as many interested parties to fall in love with your company as possible, including potential international. And oftentimes on international, they're willing to be the highest bidder because it's easier for them to come to the U.S. to buy a company than it may be for them to try and to start and to launch a company here. We have a situation with a client we're working with right now where China is very interested in our client, and they've so much as said, we will be the highest bidder. We know that the owner of this particular business is mostly not interested in selling to an international buyer, but we still want them at the table, as they represent at least leverage for us in a serious buyer who will continue to increase the value, and we can use that as we negotiate with other buyers.
Yeah, Tom, I think that's a great point. And in running a process, you know, many times the strategic buyers, they're going to come in with an offer that might be a premium, right, and looks awfully good. But if you can get a competitive process going, you get a few of those going, and then you understand from them what is the value, why are they a great buyer, what's the value they believe they can create, and in doing that and acting as a guide with them, we learn that the strategic value is much higher than their offer. Then we move the offers up. And that's the art of running a competitive auction and working with a strategic buyer. And it also really highlights, I think, how important that is today. Going back to the financial versus strategic buyer, today, interest rates are high. They're probably 2 to 2.5 times what they were a year to a year and a half ago. And the amount of leverage, the amount of debt that a financial buyer can get, and that's how they drive their returns, is putting leverage on the deals. That amount of leverage is probably 50% less than what was available a year ago. So banks have really pulled back. They're lending about half of what they would have a year ago to do a deal, and they're charging 2 to 2.5 times more. So financial values have come down, and because that, market values have come down. And strategic buyers are smart. They're going to try to come in at market or a little bit above market. But that strategic value that was there a year ago is still there. Strategic value hasn't changed because of interest rates or because of lack of leverage. And especially in the middle market. For a business that's going to sell at 30 million, 50 million, 100, 200, even, you know, up to maybe up to $1 billion, for the right strategic buyer, interest rates don't affect that. And they've got plenty of cash, they're cash rich, and even if they are going to finance it, that strategic value far offsets what interest rates have impacted. So strategic value is always there, and it's well above what market value is. So in summary, as we think about well, I see a question may have come in here. Maybe we'll try to address that. Oh, okay, yeah. John's got another great question. Could you elaborate, please, on the role and impact value of STS's international network of senior advisors? So we have a network of actually thousands of advisors that are in our database, people that have said, you know, I'd like to be an advisor with STS, but in actuality, there's probably several hundred that are very active. And when we take on a project or a mandate and we have a business that we're bringing to market, we have a very brief synopsis of on a no-name basis of what the opportunity is, what the project is, what the business is. And we send that out to all our advisors on a monthly basis. And if an advisor sees an opportunity, they think, oh, wow, I know that industry, I know that segment, and I know who strategic buyers might be for that business. They kind of raise their hand, they reach out to us, and they come to us and our deal team and say, I'd like to learn more about the business, and I think I could help find a great strategic buyer for it. And if they bring a strategic buyer to the table that we didn't otherwise know, and that strategic buyer succeeds, we give that advisor a share of our success fees. Or if they bring a strategic buyer to the table that we knew, but let's say they have a really great relationship with that buyer and can give us more than a warm introduction and help get the deal done, we also would give them a share of our advisory, our success fees. So we actually have advisors that very much work for that and want to do that on an active basis. And then there's many that also don't do it for the income. They just want to help out and make a difference. And getting back to that success to significance, if they say, hey, I don't want a share of your success fees, we'll say, well, what charity do you want that to go to? And then we'll make a donation to the charity of their choice. And in some cases, even STS will match that donation. So that's how we leverage and use our advisory network. So John, I hope that answers your question. And then really just to wrap this up in summary, you know, the path to an extraordinary exit begins with first really exploring and understanding what's driving your want or need to achieve an exit, right? Whether it's a majority exit or a minority exit, really having a deep understanding personally of that. And then a key component of that is what must you have in the transaction that you just have to have: valuation, type of buyer, your role, things like that. And then also what would be preferred, what would be nice to have or you'd like to have, but it's not must have, and really understanding and exploring those. Then going to the next level, from the lens of a strategic buyer, right? What makes you a compelling acquisition? What do you have? What are your Rembrandts in the attic? What's your secret sauce that another company would love to have? And also looking at them, other types of buyers, what do other buyers have that would be their Rembrandts in the attic and their secret sauce that you'd love to have? And when both businesses are able to become better because of the combination, that's when that 1 + 1 = 4 or 5, and you really get that strategic value. And identifying, you know, not just the strategic buyers in your space, the usual suspects, but are there other adjacencies? Are there other industries, other segments that if you combined really create value? Or internationally, are there international buyers out there that, boy, they'd love to get into the US and have access to your technology or your customers or your footprint? And so and that helps us build out a larger universe of strategic buyers. And then ultimately, when you run the process, it's that much more competitive, and run a competitive process. I will say, with that being said, we just sold a business a couple months ago where we were getting ready to run a competitive process. And one of the buyers said, we really want this business, and can we preempt? Can we avoid running the process? And we said, well, if you'll sharpen your pencil and give us a compelling bid, yeah, we'll do that. And they came in at, and our buyers in this case, our sellers in this case, said the minimum they would take was 10 times EBITDA. They came in actually at 10 times. But then when we looked at them and we modeled out what the fit was, we ultimately moved them up and ended up closing at 16 times, over 16 times. So we moved their offer up 60%. And that was just the threat of running a competitive process. And it's a great fit. The outcomes really worked out well for the buyer and the seller. And it's not about industry multiples. In this case, the industry multiples were probably 8 to 10 times, and the business ended up selling for about 100% over the industry multiple because of the strategic value of the business. So, you know, ultimately achieving an extraordinary exit is defined in 2 ways. First, and probably most important, is getting your required and preferred outcomes met, and then finding a buyer that is willing to pay a premium for this and getting both maximum valuation and your required and preferred outcomes met. And that's how we define an extraordinary exit.
Yeah, and Andy, I'm going to add to that again, because again, I've seen it, and I do think it's so important. And I know, in fact, working with another client right now, a wealth advisor that's looking to potentially exit his business, and that we just had an extraordinary exit with successfully selling another wealth advisory firm. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we're wrapping up. But if everyone's maybe on the call familiar with this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And an extraordinary exit is absolutely important from financial. But I think most of the business owners that we've worked with, they've had their business for years. Their employees mean something to them. Their business means something to them. And so those required and preferred outcomes, really thinking through those, and again, thinking about what life after business looks like, is very important. And I think it's harder for advisors who haven't gone down that road or haven't experienced that to help in thinking through that process. But it's an extremely important process, and one that I would encourage any of you who can begin to consider selling your business to think about. You want the financial for sure, but once you get a certain amount of money, unless you're trying to go buy giant yachts and private jets, there's only your needs will be met, and there'll be much more to it than just the financial. But also, as happened with this particular wealth advisor, I know, Andy, we were talking with Troy, and as they got to the final stages of closing, they had multiple parties that were interested in Troy's another managing director with STS, and they were already above the expectations of the valuation that the client had said that he needed, which was significantly more. STS had been achieved significantly more than what his minimum goal had been. But they ended up accepting an offer that was not the highest offer. And the reason they chose not to do that was selling a business is complicated. There's a lot that goes into it, and they don't always close. And so you want to have confidence in your team and their ability to close the business, but also in that the deal is going to get done. And again, I can tell you from personal experience, we were 7 months into due diligence of a process that we thought was going to take 30 to 45 days. And we were stuck. The deal was starting to fall apart. We had put a tremendous amount of time, a tremendous amount of money and energy into that process. Frankly, it's also it can be a huge distraction to your business in general. It's a once in a lifetime experience. And in the case of this particular wealth advisor, he wanted to have confidence that the deal was going to close. And STS, thankfully, I think, successfully advised him that the other buyers, the assets that they would have had to transfer the assets into another group. That acquisition was going to have to be approved by the SEC. It's a regulated industry. Whereas the other buyer, who still had a great offer, a little less, the assets didn't have to be transferred. It was going to stay under the same parent company. And so from a regulatory standpoint, we felt, and the owner agreed, that it would be much more likely that it would be approved. And so they, in an effort to make sure that the deal closed, decided to go with a little less offer. That was successfully closed, and they got a great outcome. But I think all of these, we've talked about many different kinds of examples of where having, and I'll say this last thing, really the last thing is, I strongly encourage, I know, Andy, I think you're a YPO member. I'm an EO member and have been for over 20 years. I'm a big believer in community. I think you have that also in Petra, and what you get from the experiences shares and these type of things through Petra. But in being a part of that, and over the years was in business and still have a business. I've attended numbers of different conferences. Learning about selling businesses, buying businesses. I've never attended a single conference where I saw a business owner give a presentation that said, I hired an investment banker to help me sell my business, and I wish I hadn't. The presentations have always been, I didn't hire an investment banker or a sell-side advisor to help me sell my business, and I wish I had. And again, would love for it to be STS. If you're interested in learning more, and if not, encourage you to at least talk to someone. I think we have a few more minutes for questions. Andy, thank you for your time.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone. And we do have a few minutes for questions. So I hope someone will submit some if there's anything.
Tom and Andy, I had a question for you guys. Tom, you mentioned, while you were working with Petra Coach, one of the things you focused on was making sure you weren't essential to the running of the business anymore. Is there anything else that you guys would recommend, while you're thinking about an exit down the road that you should focus on?
Yeah, we
Go ahead.
have a very comprehensive list of strategic value drivers that many times you have to start working on a couple years in advance. And we're happy to share that with anyone. I think one of the biggest things is founder risk. So anything you can do to make sure that the business isn't about the founder and you've got a good leadership team, that's probably one of the biggest values that both financial and strategic buyers like and need. It just de-risks the business. And then the other biggest thing I would say is just financials, making sure your financials are in order. That if you have a lot of personal expenses that are being run through the P&L, that's fine. Just make sure they're very well categorized and easy to track. And then ultimately, when you sell the business, you pull those out and you add them back. So there's no problems with that, but just making sure that your financials are in order and that they're easy to understand. That's probably the second biggest thing. And then there's an exhaustive laundry list of other things that we've developed over the years that we'd be happy to share.
And Andy, I was going to say on the financial, I had the good fortune of having a business partner that was a CPA accountant, and our books were very thorough and in order. And we, I think, we felt like we knew our business inside and out. Again, the buyer that we started with and a different buyer that we ended with both had were private equity backing. And when we received the due diligence inquiry list of what they wanted on their business, it was like getting a colonoscopy. I mean, we learned things about our business. They were asking us, we had a spreadsheet that was probably 6 different workbooks and some as long as 100 to 200 line items of questionnaires of things that they wanted to receive. So really having your books in order with a good understanding, an accountant that you trust. And I will tell you that just if you have an accountant that you're working with to help you do your books, that may not necessarily be also the same accountant that you want to work with to help you sell your business. In our case, it unfortunately was not. We were working with a large middle market accounting firm who represented us, that they had done lots of transactions and that they would be able to help us through this process. And we got about halfway into the process and they literally crapped the bed. We fired them. We had to start over and go with a new firm that had significant experience in M&A. And it was at the point that we almost even considered litigation with a firm that we had worked with for more than a decade. Financials are certainly important. And of course, again, as Andy said, the strategic drivers and understanding, and you know what those are. You know why your business is what it is and what drives the success that makes it, what's its special sauce. It's just helping to understand what that is for the potential buyers.
All right. Thank you guys so much for the knowledge shared today. And thank you all for joining us. We do still have just a couple minutes if anyone has any questions or comments. Be on the lookout for the recap in your inbox in the next 24 hours. It will include the recording so that you can share that with your teams. If you enjoyed this thought leadership webinar, you can find out more information on our next one, incorporating a process culture into your business with Chris Ronzio on February 22nd at petracoach.com/Petra events. Also tune in to our next 60-minute habits workshop on improving your priority writing coming up on February 8th. As a part of Petra's mission to positively impact 10 million human beings, we thank you for being here today and have a great Thursday. Thank you, guys.